People being, quote, very badly treated. The Times characterized his comments as a blunt distillation of his administration's racial politics, which rest on the belief that white people have become the real victims of discrimination in America. Here's what the president said when asked about race and his immigration policy.
I want to ask if part of your immigration agenda is also aimed at changing the racial makeup of this country.
No, not at all.
Is part of this agenda aimed at
I just want people that love our country.
Well?
It's very simple. I want people that love our country. I want people that respect our country, respect the laws of our country.
Joining me now, our friend Eddie Glaude Jr., Princeton University professor and MS Now contributor. It's good to see you as we look ahead, Eddie, to tomorrow, which, of course, is the U.S. will observe MLK Day. It's a federal holiday. It honors the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who led the nonviolent civil rights movement in the fight for racial equity and justice. How would King react to the president's point of view as expressed to the New York Times that we just heard? And why would Trump say something like that in the first place?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you and Happy New Year, Alex. I'm always a bit hesitant to try to anticipate Dr. King's words. And in fact, I would just simply refer to what he said. In 1968, about 2 months before he was assassinated, at a rabbinical assembly that was he was in conversation with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was asked this question about how could people help. And he said, first thing we need to do is to recognize that America is a racist country. That's Dr. King. I'm not paraphrasing. That's his words. He said, we need to recognize that racism still sits on the throne of America. And until we do that, until we understand that, we can't really get at the heart of the problem. And so when we listen to Donald Trump and when we look at his policies and we look at the administration, we see, at least I see, a clear white nationalist agenda at work, and specifically in the context of ICE and his immigration policy. So on the one hand, the answer to the question is that he said, no, I think he's lying. When we look at the evidence, it's very clear. He has an idea of the countries that he doesn't want and the countries that he does, the people he wants from certain other countries.
So Bloomberg Law reports that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division are encouraging white men to file workplace discrimination charges. How do you feel about this administration attempting to relitigate this almost 58 years after Dr. King's assassination?
Well, I think, that's a wonderful way of putting it, Alex. I think we're in a moment where we're relitigating the social revolutions of the mid-20th century. Not only are we dealing with issues around racial justice and racial equality, we're dealing with gender equality, we're dealing with LGBTQ plus rights. We're literally in the moment of forces trying to roll back what was achieved in the context of those struggles. And so when we hear Andrea Lucas, the chair of the EEOC, talking about reverse discrimination, urging white men to file complaints, what we see here is this concerted attack on an effort to build a more just society, but also this attempt to prove or to put forward this notion that white men, that white people are the real victims here, and that we have to, in some ways, dismantle a regime that's committed to the idea of racial justice because it's discriminating against white people. And at the heart of that view, I think, is this zero-sum game, that justice requires only one winner. And that if we are committed to a more just society, that means people have to lose. Now, I want to say this really quickly, Alex. We've been giving Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. We can talk about the grift. We can talk about the tariffs. We could talk about the end of the post-World War II consensus. But what we have to understand after a year of the second Trump administration is that the ideology of white nationalism, white supremacy, motivates so much of what they're doing. And we have to begin to describe it as such explicitly and stop giving this administration the benefit of the doubt.
Extremism experts are calling out the White House for sharing that AI-generated image last week that they say comes from a racist, far-right subculture. And the Southern Poverty Law Center previously called out DHS for using white nationalist and anti-immigrant images in their recruitment drives, Eddie. But here's what Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller said just a few days ago about the surge in ICE and Border Patrol enforcement in Minnesota. Let's watch this together.
Americans voted in a landslide to uphold the sovereignty of this country. Americans, by overwhelming majorities, oppose mass Somali fraud. Americans, by overwhelming majorities, just oppose Somali refugee resettlement in principle. So the public is behind this. Minnesota was once a pristine state, perfect education, no crime, no unrest, no violence, and then they ruined all of it, Laura, and President Trump is saving it.
I don't think he's seen the latest poll numbers, but that said, why would Trump say his immigration policy is not based on race while agents acting on his behalf appear to be doing exactly that and sending a different message?
You know, that's because he's lying. Stephen Miller is explicit. He's Donald Trump's id. He's explicit in his commitments. He's explicit in what he's saying. Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and many of those folks in his administration are committed to the idea that this country must be a white republic. ICE is becoming the most funded federal law enforcement agency for one reason, because they're charged to make America white again. And I think we need to be explicit in that. That's the motivation behind this. It's not fraud, because they just dismissed the case about welfare fraud in Mississippi and Brett Favre. It's not about criminality, right? It's about who they take to be, right, the real Americans. And I want to be very clear. When that ICE officer killed Renee Good, three shots, point blank range, they were very clear. They were drawing the lines of who are the people who are with us and who are the enemies. And those enemies can include white Americans who are committed to a more racially just and multiracial democracy. And so I think we need to be clear about what's motivating the Stephen Millers and even Donald Trump. And I want to say it again, Alex, it is a white nationalist agenda alongside the grift, alongside the greed, alongside the corruption. White nationalist ideology is in the iconography. It's in the symbols. We'll make America our home again. All of that stuff is at work and in circulation, and we either name it for what it is or we become complicit in the way it corrupts our way of life.
Is there any specific civil rights figures, Eddie, that you're looking to for inspiration to get you through this moment in history?
Wow. I look to the tradition. I look to everyday ordinary folk. I'm not just looking to leaders. I'm looking to the courage of sharecroppers, the courage of folk who had grown up in a tradition, in a society that had determined that they were less than, and they decided to take responsibility, to fight for the world that they wanted for their children. I'm looking at the courage of ordinary people, Alex, in the midst of unimaginable brutality and cruelty, who dared to strike the blow for freedom, because they should be our motivation in our moment. We don't need leaders. We need us. We have to do the work of building a better America, of saving this country. You and I, everyday ordinary people, and we have tons of examples in our history of everyday people doing just that.
Gotta say, short of being able to take one of your classes at Princeton, which obviously I can't right now, I'm so glad every time you come on because I learn a thing or two or three, my friend. Thank you very much, Eddie Glaude. Good to see you.